Hello, this is Child Psych. We are going to start Chapter 9, Cognitive Development in Early Childhood. And here we go. All right, Chapter 9 is all about the thinking versions of how children are developing. And Piaget is one of the best to talk about when you are trying to work with kids and trying to get them to think beyond what they are. And you'll be able to see how mature they are in their thinking by using some of his techniques. So the pre-operational stage, that's where you're going to have advances in symbolic thought without the use of logic. So that's where a kid will say, I'll just get my wings out and fly. So it's unfortunately we don't have wings, but kids have imaginations beyond what um, normal thinking is at an abstract or concrete operational stage, which means they have images of different things, and it's the next bullet, symbolic function, and they'll just bring them together. Like if you were putting together a T Rex and a pterodactyl, which is the flying dinosaur, and they made a T Rex adactyl, and they just pushed them together, and they said that's a new dinosaur, and he's going to come alive, and they might put an egg in the ground and think that the dinosaur is going to grow from that. Um, they have such great use of their imagination because they're not limited by the functions of a society yet. So this creativity is something that should be um, enacted and um, pushed for rather than make them more refined to what everyone else is doing. If you can keep this, you're more likely to keep their ability to abstract think later on, and it'll be a little better. So if you go down to the bottom, you'll see it says the use of symbols, the ability to classify things. So classifying would be like if something had four legs, you could say horse, dog, cat, but they might go into something where you normally wouldn't think of, like a goat or a moose or maybe even a dinosaur if they know about like a stegosaurus or a brontosaurus, something like that. They would pull things out that we would stick more towards things we're used to seeing. Um, this is kids will have empathy. Sometimes they'll be over empathetic. Sometimes I'm under empathetic. They might um, they might try to identify with the person and feel bad for them, even though it might not be that big of a deal. So they're really, really trying to use um, all of their mental representations to um, connect with the world and the people around them. If you go to the next bullet, it says understanding identities, cause and effect, and number. So when they try to look at things, they try to put people like, oh, you dress like my dad when he goes to work. So they'll start categorizing identities together or classifying them. Cause and effect. This will start to happen. Some kids are better than other at this age, but definitely the next stage, um, they get really good at cause and effect, and they start to understand numbers. Oh, like if I have five, if I give you one, I'm only going to have four left, and they might get like a little defensive about that, or they might not care at all. Each kid is so different in this. And this all can be shown in pretend play, like the use of their imagination. Can they fly? Do they put a cape on? Do they not need the cape to think they have a cape? Um, if you've ever seen any kid dress up, or they might just put a hat on and say, I'm a firefighter, like they don't need the whole outfit. Their imagination just runs wild. Piaget has some limitations at this stage. One is centration, and that's the inability to decenter, to look outside of themselves. He's only focusing on one aspect of situations. That's what kids do, right? They don't look at the whole picture. They're not like, oh, mom has to work today, so I'm not going to be able to play as much outside. They don't care. Kids don't care about that. All they care about is themselves most of the time, right? And you'll see that at the bottom where it says egocentrism. Two of the coolest things, if you look some videos up on irreversibility and conservation. Now, if I asked you a question and I said, what's 2 plus 3? And you could say 5. Let's hope you can say 5. And then I asked you, well, what's 5? And I take away 3. If you could say 2, you have the ability to reverse. Most kids at this age are still developing that skill to go backwards. Like if I walk forward, can I walk backwards in the same line? That might be something that they struggle with. Conservation is where you have different size containers and with the same amount of water. Like so you fill a bottle of water in one container, glass, and then you get a glass that's smaller but wider and it holds the same water. And just because it's smaller, kids think, oh, that doesn't have as much as the other one. Whereas they can both hold a bottle of water. It's the same amount. So as they become more like 5, 6, 7, they start to understand like, oh, okay, it's the same. Some kids might not develop that until, later, 10, 11. They focus on states rather than on transformation. So transformation was where things change from one thing to another. So if you were melting steel down and making a fence or aluminum or something like that, they only look at the one, oh, look, it's lava. It looks like lava. They don't understand that it can mold into something different. Transductive reasoning is there's no deductive or inductive reasoning being used. So just think if you couldn't draw a conclusion from a list of clues, like a detective would, or you can't say, oh, well, I think this is going to happen in this situation if you were watching a movie. Kids don't do that. They just sit there and watch the movie. They're not going to be like, oh, I think this is foreshadowing. And they don't have that ability yet. Egocentrism, I mentioned earlier, is just they focus on themselves. They should, right? They're little kids. They should be focused on them as their life is to have fun and just eat and enjoy life. Animism is lifelike to inanimate objects. So if they pick up a pen, they might make it a rocket ship. Or if they move a chair in the house, they might say that's their fortress or their throne or something like that. So they really are using their creativity to a high extent here. And the inability to distinguish appearance from reality. They don't care about reality. They only care about what's in their head at that time, and then 5 minutes later, 20 minutes later, they switch topics and do something totally different. So if you look up Piaget and the terms that I sent out, his videos that you can see on YouTube that people try to copy, and this is something that you're going to do, are really fantastic. All right, conservation tasks. So this is where you have to make sure they're the same going from one to the other. So if I said a number, 1 plus 2, and I said, what else could I say? You might say 2 plus 1. It's the same thing, but kids might not understand that. The length of something, like if it's a straight line, it extends the whole length of a room. But if I curl it in a circle or a snake like S, then kids might say, oh, that's shorter. So each one of these has its own, and you can go through and look at them. But liquid is one that's easy because you can just pour a bottle of water in. the mass of something like Play-Doh. If I flatten it out like a pancake, is it more than if it's rolled up in a meatball? Weight can go in there. Area is the size of a room. So if you're using Magna-Tiles or Legos, you can alter the shape with the same amount of Legos. As long as you're using the same amount of Legos, you'll have the same area or volume. Number sense. So when kids start thinking about numbers and counting, um, we always start with the basics, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on our fingers. Or when my kids were young, we counted up the steps. Every time we went up the steps, we counted. Every time we came down, we counted. We wanted to make sure the steps didn't disappear. Now, were the steps going to disappear? No, not at all. But the kids don't know that. They think steps, maybe they will disappear. I got to count them and make sure we don't lose any. Right? So you can make the whole learning math and numbers at an early age fun. Number knowledge, just understanding that like 2 is before 3 and 3 is after 2. That's knowledge. Right? So number transformation, how do numbers get changed from one number to another? I get more, I get less. Estimation, this is probably one of the harder tasks, right? Estimating. So if you ask the kid how many marbles are in a jar, some kids are good at an early age and just, there's probably like 20 in there. My daughters would always guess some abstract random number like 1,000 or 1,000,000 in there. They didn't really understand the quantity of what they were saying. The number patterns is another thing that kids usually either get or they don't. They're sort of like puzzles because that's a spatial thing, but then it does go back to number knowledge. Did you have an imaginary friend when you were young? So at the bottom, you'll see we read this book, Crenshaw, and Crenshaw is about an imaginary cat. So if you had one, it's actually interesting. The use of an imaginary friend means that you have a creative side that other people may not have um, utilized. Not that they couldn't have had it, but they might have grown up in a more reality-based family where that was like, no, it's not real, don't do that. Some families just let it go, and then, sometimes those kids are very creative because they've always been creating their whole life. And that's something that schools are doing a lot now, and they're trying to get kids to be more creative, more imaginative, because our world needs that because of the tasks that we're going to be faced with in the future are not going to be anything that we have dealt with before. So we have to make sure that we are able to think beyond what's in front of us. Here's data on imaginary friend. 25 to 65% of children ages 3 to 10 have one. Girls are more likely than boys. Boys impersonate imaginary more. So they might pretend, copy you. These kids who have imaginary friends, more imaginative, they're happy, cooperative. Right? They're fluent with language, which kind of makes sense, right? Because they're playing 2 roles sometimes or more. They don't need TV as much because they can create their own fun. Even though they're egocentric, right? They might want to watch TV. These kids can be entertained without it. They have curiosity, right? Because they're looking for other things to be creative with. They usually are excited and they're persistent during play, right? Because they can create their own fun. They have a great emotional understanding 3 years later. So when you have an imaginary friend, you end up playing both roles. And if you think about this at an early age, the social part of life, girls tend to um, be a little better at an early age, just because they get the social world faster than boys. Boys sometimes don't develop their social awareness till they're like 40. I think I just learned it a couple years ago. So girls develop at like age 3, 4, 5. They're looking at dresses, looking at somebody's hair, looking at, oh, that's new. I like that. Oh, you have that. They're really, really, really interested in others. And boys might not know you walk in the room sometimes. Now, obviously, there's going to be outliers here, kids that break that mold. There always is, right? It's not 100% perfect. Um, Talking about my daughter, Angry and Happy Amelia. So when my daughter got mad, she would pretend she was a cheetah, and she would just run around the house. And during soccer games, she would pretend she was a cheetah, run off all four legs, and just go in circles and have fun. When she's angry, she would tell us she's not there. I'm in cheetah land, so that means don't talk to me. She also used fireballs. After we watched The Last Airbender, she took that and some of the witchery things in Harry Potter. She also would use to like cast spells on us. She would shoot fireballs at her sisters when she was mad at her. She had an imagination that was beyond the rest of our family, even though my kids are 1 year apart. It was very interesting to watch, though. All right, so we're going to take a break from Piaget and um, the whole imagination part and pretend play, and we're going to move to a new set of theories, and this is called information processing. This is just how we encode, store, and retrieve information. So, your memory has a working memory, and it takes in all sensory information. So, the reason you can smell um, your grandmother's Thanksgiving turkey, or wherever you might go for Thanksgiving, or some big meal, or maybe it's Sunday dinner, is because your senses are working in high gear to see the food, to smell the food, taste the food, right? Maybe even touching the food. So that's the sensory life that we all take in. Memory is long term, and there is an executive functioning. And think of executive functioning as like a manager of your memory. This is what it looks like. It is very interactive. So if you look on the left, you'll see any stimuli that comes in. So visual, taste, touch, that's called haptic, um, or echoic memory is what you hear. So don't make it difficult, right? Just make it visual, taste, touch, and hear. So anything that comes in, your mind is like, okay, I have this stuff. What do I do with it? Well, it goes from, if you take it in and you actually observe it, it'll pass your selective attention. So people, maybe it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a parent. As soon as you start talking, they might like zone out, drift off. If you go into teaching, you'll get used to this. You might be doing it right now through this PowerPoint. But after selective attention, if you choose to keep and pay attention to that information, it can go to your short-term memory. It does go to your short-term memory. And then depending on if you rehearse and want to keep that information, like a phone number that somebody tells you, you don't have anything to write down, you might say 555 12 12, 555 12 12, 555 12 12. The more you rehearse, the more it'll go into a storage. The storage could make it to long-term memory if you rehearse or study it enough, right? Then your short-term memory might say, hey, I need this information. It can pull it from your long-term memory, and then it can go back out. and decode the information so you can give it to somebody else. So that's an important process of your memory. Um, when you forget things, there are a couple reasons for that. One is decay. You just haven't used it. So if you leave high school and you don't practice math, your math skills are going to deteriorate. There's no doubt about that. But maybe your money skills don't, because we interact with money a lot. If you're asked a geometry question and you haven't had geometry in 5, 10 years, you might have to study and relearn it, right? Um, Sometimes there can be a retrieval failure. That could be where you're just think of the like a wire in your brain that goes to that memory, but that wire gets cut. And now you have retrieval failure because you only learned and memorized something one way. So it's very difficult to pull that back out. And that's where you're like, I know what it is, I know what it is, I know what it is. And then you never think of it because you haven't made that many connections or strategies to connect that to other pieces of information. Um, if you really know the information, you probably learned it through like a distributive um, method. You learned it over time rather than studying the night before for a final and then you know it for a day or two, and then after that, it decays. Interference is the last one. Um, I've been practicing this probably for the last 5 to 7 years. You can have a radio on, but if you've ever had a radio on and it's music that you know the words to, and you try to type a paper, you will start to type words that you hear in the radio, or it might be saying in your mind, or you could be singing, and so your writing might not be as good as it could be. So this is the basic gist of how memory works. There is another model here, and how it works, and it's the same. If you look at over here, you'll see these are your sensory stimuli. After about 3 seconds, do you pay attention to them or not? No. If it's a gunshot, it's going right here. Short-term working memory. Then you start thinking, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Do I need to go to long-term memory or do I need to get away? What do I do here? After you get short-term memory and working memory, it comes to the long-term memory if you do something to try to remember it. A phone number, you could have just a day in your life that you just really vividly remember. I've had many, and some that I don't want to remember, right? When you go to like a funeral or something, I still remember certain things where you're just like, man, I hope this never happens again. And retrieval happens, right? When you maybe go back to a funeral, like, oh, I remember the last time I was here, or the last one of these I went to. But also good things happen out of that, like when you go to a wedding. Oh, the last wedding we went to was so much fun. I'm ready to go to this wedding, right? Or might be school, it might be work, something like that. All right. There's different memory diagram. I'm going to go over some of this on the next slide. And we're almost done. Hang on. Here we go. Memory. Recognition. Where you recognize a stimuli. So if you see those golden arches, you know that's McDonald's. Right? If you see the Taco Bell sign, you know that's a Taco Bell. If you hear slogans like the quack of a duck, there's aflac. Like if they said that, and you're like, oh, okay, I know what that is. That's recognition. Right away, you know it. This is what marketing people do. How can we get people to remember? Recall is something that you just pull out real fast, like your birthday. When was your first kiss? Who was your first boyfriend or girlfriend? Um, what was your sport you played when you were younger? all that stuff can get pulled up rather easily as long as you don't have any interference or decay in your memory. Script. That's an outline of what to do. In your memory, you always have a script going on. Like sometimes people have a loose script. Some people's script is very tight and they stick to like an orderly fashion of doing things. We have generic memory that reproduces a script. So, how do you ask for a date? Like, do you have a pickup line? Do you just start talking to people? Does it take you a while to get to know people and open up, and then ask for a date, or are you not a person who is ever going to pursue a date? And that means where you will look for someone to pursue you rather than pursue them. Episodic memory is long-term specific experiences that you remember, and these will usually be pretty vivid. So like I was mentioning earlier, funerals, weddings, 9/11 was one with the Twin Towers that came down. Uh, if you weren't alive for that, maybe the stock market crash in 2008, where the housing market just plummeted. That could be something that really affected your family or maybe your parents' retirement or something like that. The last part, autobiographical memory, is what you think your biography would be, like your life. So at an early age, it might be hard to know, but if I said, hey, if you had to give me a biography of your life in the past 2 years, you can probably get a good description of what's going on. All right. So that is it. We have finished, and I thank you for your time.